Hello and welcome to the last live stream of today from With Locals. My name is Pim and I will be moderating this live stream. Today we will be going to Edinburgh with our new host Neil, who will tell us all about whiskey. But before we go there, I want to mention a few things. Like if you want to have some comments, remarks, or let us know something that you really like, please use the chat for that. I will make sure that Neil will get. I will relay this to Neil. Aside from that, you can also subscribe on withlocals.tv. You can leave your email there, and then you will get an email with the next live stream. But you can also click the like, subscribe, or follow buttons if you're watching this on Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook. Further that, we have another live stream coming up tomorrow, which tomorrow will be Foodie Thursday, and then we will have a Spanish veggie tapas experience with host Drika, if I pronounce that correctly. So if you're interested in that, please join us tomorrow as well. One final thing before we head over to Edinburgh is that you can also donate to support your local. You can do this by hitting the pink button on withlocals.tv, or you can click the link in the description on either YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch. But as you can see, I have a lot of whiskies here, and I think local Neil will be ready to tell us all about them. So, Neil, how are you doing over there?
I'm very good, Pim. Thank you very much. Nice and sunny evening here in Edinburgh.
Welcome. Let's see, I already, before we even start, I get the first question already. Nice collection of bottles behind you. Which is your favorite? And I think that's a question for me, but I think it can also be an important question to you, Neil. I think my favorite would be the Lagavulin, this one. But which one is your favorite, Neil?
Well, none of them. It's on your shelf there, Pim. My favourite is a brand called Mortlach, which is owned by Diageo. It's a Speyside whisky. It's pretty unusual and it's just fantastic. Or potentially an Edinburgh behind that. Are just fantastic brands, great brands of whisky.
Okay, then I think you can tell us all about the whiskey. I mean, I sometimes drink a whiskey, but you're probably the expert on this. So take us away on a tour through the whiskey history or whiskey, just anything related to whiskey.
Okay, Pim, not a problem. Evening, everyone. What I'm going to do this evening is talk you through the making of single malt Scotch whisky, how to appreciate nosing it and tasting it. And we're going to go across a range of the Lowlands, Speyside, and over to Islay with a Glenkinchie single malt whisky, a Balvenie double wood, and we're going to finish with a Lagavulin. Originally, I'm going to tell you just the definition of single malt. I'll tell you how it's made. Then we'll have a wee dram, and hopefully you have one of these three whiskies with you as we are actually talking through it. I'll show you how to look at it, nose it, and understand and appreciate it before you enjoy the flavour of it. Then we'll go in and tell you the definition of Scotch whisky and the right way and the wrong way to drink single malt whisky, which is quite an unusual thing for people to understand. And we'll have a second dram of Balvenie double wood. Then we'll tell you all about blended whisky, the difference of blended whisky to single malt whisky. A lot of people don't really understand that, and it's quite important. As I see in Pim's shelf there has a Ballantine, which is a blended whisky, and I'll explain all about that. And I'm open to any questions at any time. Just interrupt, put them on the screen. I can't really see it as I'm talking, but Pim will interrupt me or speak to me or interject, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can. The simple point about single malt whisky is a very simple definition. People get confused with it. We split it up, and the word single actually only means one whisky made in one distillery. That's all it means, nothing else. Malt whisky tells us the ingredients of it. If it has the word malt whisky on the bottle, it tells us it's made of water, barley, and yeast. Nothing else. So a single malt whisky is barley, yeast, and water mixed together in one distillery. You may have heard of double malt whisky. That quite simply is more than one distillery, two distilleries collaborating together with their malt whiskies, their single malt whiskies. Blended malt, Monkey Shoulder is a great one for that, and probably most famous in the world, is a blended malt, and that's three or more distilleries collaborating to make the malt whisky. That's as simple as single malt whisky means to everyone. How is it made? Well, the barley used to always be just grown in Scotland. Nowadays, the industry is so large that our island is not big enough to supply all the barley, so we import some from England, and we actually send a lot of the seed over to Eastern Europe now, who grow it to our specification and return it to be converted into malt. Now, malting. It's not done in distilleries anymore. It's a very simple process. The barley is kept in what's called a malting. We're very original with our names here in Scotland. So it goes into the maltings where it is stored and dried out. Once it's ready to go into the malting process, what we do is we soak it in water for approximately 2 to 3 days. Just as the little green shoots start to come away from it, we immediately kill it off by adding intense heat. This process, believe it or not, is called the malting process. And what we're doing during the malting process by regrowing it and killing it off is actually converting the starches in the barley into sugars. We need the sugar to make alcohol. The malt is then conveyed into the distillery, wherever it may be in Scotland, and it then goes into what's called a mill, which is big metal plates and steel plates or whatever type of plates, which grind the malt all down into right soft powders, which we call grist, G-R-I-S-T. Don't worry about some of the names I'm going to give you during the process. They're not particularly important, to be honest. So once we get the grist, every distillery has it to a different level of powder to grain, etc. Then it goes into a massive big stainless steel, generally stainless steel container called a mash tun. It has paddles on it and it has a false floor, and we add hot water to it. And what we're doing with that is we're liquefying the grist, the sugars, the powder. It comes out of the malt, and we then add water at 65 degrees centigrade, some water at 75 degrees centigrade, then we go up to 85 degrees centigrade. All the time, the paddles are going round, liquefying the powder and taking it through to a false floor. As it gets piped through to the next stage, it's 85 degrees centigrade, remember, pretty hot. So we have to cool it down to 18 degrees centigrade. So as it gets piped through to the next stage, it naturally cools itself down to 18 degrees centigrade. And we put it into what's called a washback. Washbacks are very large wooden tubs, sometimes over 6-7 meters high, over 2 floors. And we put the liquid, what we call the wort, W-O-R-T, into the washback, and we now add the yeast. The yeast, adding yeast to sugar creates a chemical reaction, which is called fermentation. Exactly the same as making a beer at this stage in time. For a beer, you would add some hops as we go, and 2 or 3 days later, you'll have some beer. We're going to take it away after we convert it to alcohol and basically boil it up. So every distillery has a different period of time, between 40 hours and 120 hours. So it's up to about 5 days potentially that we ferment the wort into alcohol. After that period of time, whatever your distillery has, we have a liquid that we now call the wash, and it's a very strong beer almost. It's exactly the same as beer, as I say, approximately about 8% alcohol by volume. Really strong beer, but not particularly pleasant to drink. It is drinkable, but I wouldn't recommend it at this stage. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take it into the still room and put it through 2 very large copper stills. They're called pot stills. Each distillery generally has 2 because we only distill twice here in Scotland. The Irish distill 3 times, and I'm pretty sure the Irish do it to be sure, to be sure, to be sure, as they actually say in Ireland. But we only do it 2 times. No 2 pot stills in the whisky industry in Scotland are the same shape and size. And this helps create different levels of oils, as does the period of fermentation. The longer it ferments, the more natural oils create during that process, as it goes into the distillation as well. Now, some of the pot stills are very high. They're all made of copper. Every pot still is made of complete copper for 2 reasons. One, copper is malleable, which means it can be easily knocked into different shapes and sizes. The other reason is copper actually reacts with the wash, the liquid, as it vaporizes and boils up to create different, what we call meatiness and the complexity of your single malt whisky. So again, it's boiled between 4 and 6 hours. Alcohol boils at 7 to 8 degrees centigrade. Water boils at 100 degrees centigrade, so we heat it in the middle to around about 8 to 5, 8 to 6, and we're evaporating the alcohol from the liquid completely. As it vaporizes, it contacts with the side and the copper of the pot still as it goes up, creating the complexity. It goes to the top, and we'll have what's an arm. If any of you have ever been to a distillery, you'll see what we call the lin arm, L-I-N-N. It can be any shape from that right over down to that size, and the vapor goes up over into that, to a copper pipe running outside all the buildings through a cold water tank, which is actually condensing the vapour back into liquid form. This copper pipe is called a worm, believe it or not. But that's what it does. After the first boiling or distillation, we literally have a liquid which is somewhere in the region of 23, 24% alcohol by volume. Remember, we're leaving the water behind. Pretty strong alcohol, but not strong enough to make our whiskey. So thereafter, we boil it a second time. Similar time, 4 to 6 hours. It varies. Every distillery has their own time, and it boils up through, vaporizes up over the linarm, and comes back into another tank. By the second one, we have a crystal clear liquid, which we call the spirit. And the spirit could be anything up to about 85% alcohol by volume, because we've left all the water and residue behind. We have almost alcohol. And we go into what's called a spirit safe. Now, whiskey is a worldwide commodity. I think it's something like 30 bottles are sold worldwide every single second from Scotland, every second. But it's still a cottage industry per se. The stillman will sit at the spirit safe and have a manual handle. In the spirit safe, you'll have 3 glasses. Those of you who have been to distilleries previously will actually know what I'm talking about. And we cut the spirit into 3, which we refer to as the head, the heart, and the tail. The head's very strong, it's very toxic. So the stillman will pour it through as it cools down, and as the length of pour, he has a hydrometer and measures the alcohol by volume. As it gets down to the sort of mid-70s, he will make what's called the cut. Take it into the next jar and take the heart of the liquid. And he'll run that for several hours until it gets down to sort of low 40s, 42, 43% alcohol by volume, and capture the tail. Now, some of you may have heard the stories about us here in Scotland being mean with our money, frugal with our money. I don't accept that at times, but I've got to say in the whisky industry, we waste absolutely nothing. The head's too strong, the tail's too weak. We mix that together, and that will go back in with the next lot of whiskey or spirit to be made. Once it's all cut, it's roughly about 10% we take off the original wort from the mash tun, and everything keeps going back. So we have this crystal clear spirit, and to be quite honest with you, at this stage, you had it next to a bottle of water with a lid on, you would not be able to tell the difference. Now, when you look at your bottle of single malt Scotch whisky, yes, it's a lovely golden colour or a darker colour. That is created during the maturation. And I'll tell you a wee bit more about the maturation after we have the first dram. Pim, do we have any questions that you want to ask before we have a dram?
Yes, we have one question from Eric coming in. He asks, how many distilleries are there in Scotland?
It's very difficult, Eric, to be specific, but we're looking at somewhere about 140 now. Up until 5 years ago, it was pretty fixed at about 128. But the distillery is opening all the time now. A lot of them are making gin. They make spirit for whiskey for 6 months. Then they make, and it has to lie to mature, which I'll tell you about in a minute. The other 6 months they make gin. But we're somewhere a region of about 140 or there or thereabouts making whiskey.
Cool. I think that that answers Eric's question. And then I have a question about the Lin arm that you mentioned, the copper arm. Do they change that arm in the sense that it then adds more complexity the longer the vapor actually is against that arm, that it drips down, or does it work like that a bit, or how does the complexity add to the?
Once it's set, it's been done over centuries, Pim, with basically trial and error until we get a perfect spirit, and it's so specific and precise. If for any reason the pot still gets damaged or dented, or the linarm gets twisted in any way, and the spirit perchance becomes even better, the next pot still, which lifetime is normally about 15 years per pot still, they will artificially put that dent in it to keep that spirit exactly the same for flowing through for the next 15 years. So yeah, it's very, very precise and specific.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know this at all.
Yep.
Yeah, good to know. Then I have another question coming in from Reinout. He
Yeah.
asks, is there a specific way that works best to get started with drinking whiskey? Now, we just got the way to, well, part one of making whiskey, but he already is interested in drinking whiskey.
Then
Do you have any tips?
yes, I will explain that as we go on, actually, if you bear with me on that one, because we're going to, the reason I've selected the three whiskies, Glenkinchie, Balvenie Doublewood, and Lagavulin, is very specific on what we call the finish. The first one will be at the front of the tongue, then the middle of the tongue, and then to the back of the tongue. Now, some of you may be aware of the regions of single malt whisky in Scotland. We have Islay, we have Lowland, we have Speyside, we have Highland, and we have the Islands. Now, us in the whisky industry recommend don't worry about that. Islay is specific to peaty whisky, but there is 2 distilleries who make non-peaty whisky. You go to Speyside, which a lot of people will say is my favourite region. Yes, it can be, because it'll have light, delicate, smoky, but it'll have peaty equally in measures as some of the Islay ones will. So, I don't believe in the regions. What we call a whisky flavour map, if you can just imagine a square, if you're looking at me on a computer, a slightly rectangle is a square rectangle, and draw a line down the middle of your screen and a line across the centre of your screen, and have 4 quarters. I'm actually going to show you how to plot that into the quarters by looking at it, by nosing it, not by tasting it. The tasting over the lips is purely for the pleasure. We'll learn everything and be able to plot it there. And the idea of the quarters is, if you enjoy a specific whisky, which hopefully you do, and it sits, for instance, in the bottom left corner where Glenkinchie will sit, and it's light and delicate. If you're anywhere in the world and walk into a bar and just see Glenkinchie's not available, and you think, I like a Scotch whisky, you may get a Lafroig, as Pim's got at the back of him there, which is night and day. You'll be as well drinking a beer, or a gin, or a dark rum, or a Bacardi, because it is not like the whisky that you would get in the bottom left. So the idea is you can download these flavour maps quite simply, plot where your whisky sits in that, Google where they all sit, and you can walk into a bar and pick 10 whiskies which you will enjoy, which all sit into that quarter, if that's your delicacy sitting in that quarter. And the Balvenie one, the middle one, is quite an interesting one. Hopefully Renard will actually answer your question. So hopefully one or two of you, if not most of you, will have a Glenkinchie whisky here. It's actually a Lowland whisky. It is classed as the Edinburgh Malt, quite simply because it's the nearest distillery to Edinburgh. And I actually had the privilege of working there for 3 years some time ago as a tour guide, and had the opportunity to nose and taste several thousand drams of the Glenkinchie. So what you would first do is you would pour yourself a little drop. I'll just pour a small drop. Now, here in Scotland, we refer to it as a dram. You've probably heard of a dram, and people always ask, what is a dram? A dram
There's a
is
dram, Neil.
a dram. You get learned today, Pim. A dram is not a measure of whisky, it is a drink of whisky. It may be a small amount, it may be a large amount, but a dram is just a drink of whisky. It may be a single measure in the bar, it may be 3 measures in the bar. It's still referred to as a dram. So a dram is literally a drink of whisky. Now, in Scotland, as I said earlier on, we get criticised for being frugal, I would like to describe it, and mean with money. But in a house, when you're visiting friends and you're having a dram in a house in Scotland, you always put your first finger and forefinger together, hold it at the bottom of the glass, and your measure should never be less than the second finger. Now, that's a real dram, as we would call in Scotland. How to understand single malt Scotch whisky? It is actually very simple. As I say, we learn most of it by looking and by nosing. So when you pour your single malt whisky, the first thing you would actually look for is the colour. Now, you might not see it very clearly on this screen here, but Glenkinchie is a very light golden colour. And you'll see how colours in whiskies vary in different bottles, and I'll explain that. If it's a lovely light golden colour, it indicates to us it has been matured previously in an ex-bourbon, American bourbon whisky cask, which is American oak. It's very hard wood, and it's a very light and coloured wood. And that will impart specific aromas for us and specific flavours. So once you actually see that colour, right away you can actually pull into your mind what some of the flavours and aromas will be. Because nosing and tasting single malt Scotch whisky is very subjective. People go into it with a very, very closed mind, and you need to open your mind. And the more your mind's opened and you feel these aromas, you appreciate the aromas, you will actually enjoy your single malt Scotch whisky far better. So we've looked at that. The colour, it tells me it's bourbon matured. You would then roll your glass on the side. And those of you who have ever visited Scotland before, we actually play with the English language and have different words for most of the English language. Rolling your glass and shaking it about like that is called a shugle in Scotland. So you give your glass a good shugle, and you look at the oil lines dropping down here, which there's lots and lots of them. I don't think you'll be able to see them, but lots and lots of them. So the colour's light. So if you look at this square and just imagine where I'm saying, on the left-hand side is light, on the right-hand side is rich, the bottom is delicate, and the top is smoky. Always remember these 4 points, and I'm quite happy to explain them again to you if somebody's not had time to write them down or didn't take that in the first opportunity. So by looking at the colour, it tells us Glenkinchie's light over to the left-hand side of the flavour map. By looking at the legs falling away very, very quickly, it tells us it's probably delicate. But because delicate is the opposite of smoky, we have to have a quick nose at it. And by taking a nose, again, if you haven't experienced the phenol of a Lagavulin or a Lafroy, you won't know what I'm talking about. But once you've smelt it, you'll never, ever forget it. So you take it to your nose, there's no smoke. So right away, by colour, legs, no smoke, this will sit in the light, delicate, bottom left-hand corner in a flavour map. And there's probably 100, 150 single malt whiskies which will be of similar colour and flavour and character, which you would probably enjoy if you enjoyed a Glenkinchie. But once you've identified that, we now get to the pleasurable part. We would then take it back to our nose and have a nose of it. Now, you'll probably see me just swapping sides there. The best way to nose a whisky is have your mouth open slightly, take it to each nostril separately, and just breathe in normally. Don't take a big suck of air in, just breathe in normally, and hopefully you'll be able to pick some of the flavours, aromas up here. Now, bourbon matures, as I say, it tells me right away by looking at the colour, there will be vanilla in here. Now, you should be able to get the sweetness, but sometimes it's difficult. It's subjective between honey or possibly vanilla, but the dryness, if you can imagine a vanilla pod, sticking that right to your nose or put it into your mouth, the sweetness, but the dryness hits you. So that's exactly what's there. Now, there's also some citrus coming through. It's a bit orangey and actually lime to me tonight. In a warmer day, it's more lime. You don't get the lemon. If it's cooler, for some strange reason, you sometimes get lemon coming through it. If you have a Glenkinchie, you may be able to get some grass coming through it. And incredibly, Glenkinchie is owned by Diageo. And the professional notes from Diageo actually say there's an aroma called green bananas in that. And as I said earlier, I have nosed thousands, if not 10,000 Glenkinchie's whiskies, and I have never, ever experienced the green bananas there. So much so, when I probably took 5,000, 6,000 people around the distillery, I was quite happy to have a bet. If anyone actually was specific on the fruit, i.e. green bananas, I would buy them a bottle of 12-year-old Glenkinchie. Safe to say I'm a true Scotsman and frugal. I never had my wallet out yet. Nobody's ever got it. I don't know where it comes from. So, if you get it, absolutely fantastic. Proud of you. Great. You're really good at nosing whiskey. But again, some of the things I've suggested, the lime, the orange, the vanilla, you should get the vanilla fairly clear. The grass, the hay coming through it, it should be fairly clear. And if you get some of that, absolutely great. If not, don't worry. It is purely subjective. So we've been able to plot it. We've got some nice aromas going in our minds. It remembers us of the harvest time at the hay, having some dinner with some lemon cake or something like that. So we would then have a little taste of it. And what we do here in Scotland is we say slangevar, which means good health. Cheers. So if you have a dram in front of you, enjoy. Just take a little sip just to get the benefits from it. On the little sip, the first thing that'll hit you is the alcohol. Give it a few seconds. You'll get the dryness, you'll get the sweetness coming through from the vanilla. And again, it's like a vanilla pod in your mouth. You should get the sweetness coming through with the bitterness of the orange, and it's almost lemony. You get that citrus, dry citrus on your tongue. I'm getting the grassy, the hay coming through now as well. So I'm getting 3 things. But bear in mind, we got 5, maybe 6 on the nose. So the aroma is there in the nose. There's more. We've been able to plot it. By tasting it, you couldn't plot that. Exactly. But it reaffirms by tasting. So what we'd actually do is, if you're fortunate enough to have some water with you, I have a pipette, the proper way to nose whiskey, because what we suggest is you just put a couple of drops into your glass. Look very closely at your glass. If you've got a Glenkinchie or something bourbon matured, it's quite light, you can't see it. Remember, I was referring to natural oils. So the darker your single malt is, the more you'll see the oils separating. So if you put a couple of drops of water into it, maybe 3-4 drops is all you need to put in. Now, I'm not saying drink it like this. If you want to put more water in, I'll explain about adding water to single malt in a couple of minutes. If you want to put more in, feel free to add some water to get to your pleasure. Just let it go in, let it blend in together, mix together, and take it back to your nose. The vanilla is slightly gone. It's a lot sweeter. The dryness in the vanilla's gone. For me, it's just orange now. The lime's gone. There's no lemon. But it's a far more pleasant. There's not the intensity of the alcohol hitting in your nose now. Have another taste of it now. Slange and see what you think. I think it works absolutely perfectly. Nice and smooth. Takes away the dryness. It's a bit sweeter now. The vanilla is more perfect. The lemon and lime's coming through now. No orange. The grassy, floral, almost like flower bed. And it's just an absolute lovely drop. Now, the good thing, I don't know where you are in the world just now. It's 7:30 here in Scotland in the evening. You may be in the Far East, you may be in America, and it might only be 9-10 o'clock in the morning. The good thing about a Glenkinchie whisky, if you have it, we refer to it here in Scotland as a breakfast whisky. It's perfectly legitimate to drink a Glenkinchie, a nice, light, delicate one, in your cornflakes as a substitute for milk before midday. And nobody should be able to criticise you doing that. So it's a lovely breakfast whisky. Nice, short finish on it, and give you some lovely flavours coming through in there. So hopefully somebody have enjoyed it. If anybody has a Glenkinchie or any whisky they've enjoyed there with me, it would be great to see in the chat bar if you preferred it with water or without water. It's an interesting point. And Pim, if you can keep an eye on that for me, please, that would be absolutely brilliant. And we can have a little poll to see how that goes from there.
I sure will, Neil.
Thank you. Scotch whisky. What defines Scotch whisky? Several things define Scotch whisky, and the first one is fairly obvious. It must be made in Scotland. Not just made in Scotland, it must be matured in Scotland, fully matured in Scotland, in an oak cask. No other wood is used in the maturation process. 75% of all colour, flavour and character of the whisky comes from the maturation. As I said earlier, before it goes into the oak cask, it's a crystal clear liquid like water. Without smelling it, you would never know what was what from there. So it's fully matured in Scotland in an oak cask for a minimum of 3 years. 3 years and 1 day, we can now call it Scotch whisky. Here in Scotland, we don't refer to it as Scotch whisky. We only refer to it as whisky because we make it and we're in Scotland. So from there, but it also must be bottled in Scotland. Now that sounds quite strange, but when you think an oak cask is wood, it's porous. So you may have heard of a term called the angel's share. Angel's share is the evaporation of the maturation spirit and whisky. It goes into the atmosphere, and you'll have smelt that before if you've ever been to a distillery. So the angel's share reduces 2% year on year on the volume of liquid. It also, as it matures through time, reduces in alcohol by volume. So there will be a shelf life on whisky because it must be a minimum of 40% alcohol by volume. Anything less, it can't be called whisky. Now, once it's in the bottle and the cork's on it, this whisky will never change. It will stay exactly the same and it'll outlive any of us on this call today. It may evaporate, or it will evaporate very slowly. Once you open it, it'll evaporate slightly quicker, but it will never ever change flavour, colour, character, or anything. Now, as it's maturing in the oak, as I said, it's changing, it's evaporating, it's reducing alcohol by volume. So if we sent a cask of whisky to America, to Netherlands, to Australia, to South America, it may take days, weeks, months. That whisky is changing every single day in the cask. Once it's in the bottle and exported anywhere in the world, you'll be drinking exactly the same Glenkinchie as I will be drinking, and I reside less than 5 miles from the distillery. That's how the definition of Scotch whisky. Now, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to drink it. I get told, I've been in the whisky industry many years now. First thing I've got to say is rubbish. And I know with locals are a Dutch company here, Pim, I'm sorry, but I get a lot of Dutch guys and a lot of German guys saying to me, you must drink whisky straight. Rubbish. Now, 2 reasons. The first reason I would say this is, well, I was in a previous life, young late teenager working, and I had the opportunity to visit Glenkinchie Distillery regularly and meet the then manager many years ago by the name of Alistair Munro, who told me as a master brewer, the maker of the whisky, that when you put water into a single malt whisky, it opens the flavours. So the flavours that are opening, as I explained to you earlier, and if you've got darker whiskies, Sherry Matured, I'll explain in a minute, and Lagavulin in particular, when you put the water in, you'll see what I'm talking about there. Look closely and you'll see the oil separating, opening the flavours. It's like drinking a red wine from a big, large glass. It opens the flavours, allows it to breathe, the same principle. But secondly, when they tell me you cannot put water in a single malt whisky, after the maturation process, generally, a single malt whisky coming out of the cask will be anything from 55 to 65% alcohol by volume. This is, if we bottle at this stage, this is what we call cask strength. You may have heard of it. It's not as popular as the standard whisky. It's slightly more expensive because you're paying for the alcohol by volume. I would defy most people to drink that without putting water in it. However, as I've said, whisky has to be, single malt whisky has to be minimum of 40%. If you have a bottle in front of you, a standard Lagavulin will be 43% alcohol by volume. Glenkinchie's 43. My Balvenie, we're going to taste is 40. The vast majority are under 45% alcohol by volume. How do we achieve that at the bottling stage? We add water. So if someone tells me or tells you that you cannot put water in a single malt Scotch whisky, it is there before you get it. And my other answer to that is, my God, what are the 3 ingredients? Water, 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 yes, yeast and barley. It's personal choice. There is no wrong way to drink single malt Scotch whisky. If you want to enjoy it without putting water in it, please feel free to do so. If you want to put water in it, feel free to do so. Don't be embarrassed by anyone. When you're in a bar, don't get the barman to put, or the barmaid to put water in it. Ask for a jar of water, jug of water on the side. Make it to your satisfaction. People ask, can you put ice in whisky? Absolutely. The only science we actually know regarding whisky is if we cool it down, it closes the flavour. If that's what you want to do, feel free to do it. However, as that ice melts, it's opening the flavour. So it's changing as you're drinking along. Now, if that's what you want to do, absolutely feel free. No, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I'm sorry, I just got distracted. I'm going to come to that with the Sheriff. Is it Sheriff? Is it? I saw that question. Give me 30 seconds. People ask, can you put soda water lemonade into single malt whisky? Absolutely. Soda water, the bubbles in the water actually prevent the oils from separating, so they're actually diluting it, not necessarily opening the flavours. But if that's what you want to do, feel free. Diageo, the largest drinks company in the world, Edrington Group, the second largest in the world as far as I understand, own more than 50% of the distilleries here in Scotland. They account for over 60% of all whiskies exported from Scotland. Millions and millions of gallons go to the Asian market for cocktails. If these companies are wrong and it puts Scotch whisky on the world stage, I'm happy with it, and I think everyone in Scotland is happy with it. However, never ever let me catch you putting Coca-Cola into a single malt whisky. It is sacrilege, as we call it here in Scotland.
Well, Neil, that's this is really amazing story. I mean, about adding water to your whiskey, that's fine. Adding like ice to your whiskey, that's fine because it's also water. But never ever add Coca-Cola to your whiskey.
Absolutely, it's not a particularly great drink in Scotland. I think Coca-Cola, just a useless fact on Coca-Cola there. Coca-Cola is in about 175 countries in the world. There is only one country in the world that is not the #1 seller where it's sold, and that's here in Scotland. Because as you know, whiskey is our #1 drink, and if you've been here before, there's a drink called Iron Brew, made of girders, as we say in Scotland, is our other national drink, and that is a bigger seller for soft drinks here in Scotland than Coca-Cola is. So no, very few countries do it. Spanish are quite bad for it, and Australians are quite bad for it. Rest of the world, fine, absolutely not a problem. That brings us on to our second whisky today. We're going to try is a Balvenie. Balvenie is probably my favourite brand over the piece. It has lots of expressions, and if you hear the word expressions, an expression is just a bottling of whisky. Balvenie, for instance, will have 10, 12 different types of whisky, ages of whisky, matured in different casks. Each individual one is an expression. So Balvenie Double Wood is somebody too sweet in Iron Brew. Yeah, you're right. Not in whisky either. Balvenie have the Double Wood. It has Caribbean cask. It has triple cask. Each of them are actually what we refer to as expressions of whisky. Now, after we have a quick taste of this, I'm going to cover what I was talking about in the regions of Scotland, how really it doesn't work. So Balvenie, if you look at it in the glass, the Double Wood, it is darker than the Glenkinchie. You might be able to see it there. It's particularly darker. So right away, by looking at the colour, this tells me there is a second maturation. 95% of single malt Scotch whisky mature in a bourbon cask, ex-bourbon, for a period of time. The other 5% never see a bourbon cask. They may be in sherry, they may be in port, they may be in white wine, red wine, brandy. Oh, and Balvenie do one which is a Caribbean spiced rum cask. And if you've never tried that and you can find it wherever you are, please try it. It is absolutely wonderful. So we look at the double maturation. Invariably, if it's double matured, it has been bourbon first, then it is sherry. Vast majority. So right away, when you look at the colour, this is going to tell me there's going to be different aromas, because the sherry is usually European oak, which is a darker wood and a softer wood. So that's going to impart completely different colours and different flavours to the hard, lighter coloured wood of the American oak. And this is how we can tell it by looking like that. So you give your glass a shake, as I say, a good shugle. Then you would look at your legs again, and every whisky is the same. And the legs are a lot slower coming down here. So we're looking at the dark, so it's not light, it's not really rich, it's not particularly dark. So where does it sit? It'll sit somewhere in between there. So I would say is up and down line, halfway across, and you may not identify what I'm saying until you see all these different colours of whisky, but on the flavour map, it's self-explanatory. We don't know, it's not particularly delicate because the legs are pretty slow. It may be smoky, we don't know. So we'll have a quick nose at it, and there's no smoke there. It's a wonderful aroma from a Balvenie Double Wood. I just love this whisky. And I can't remember who asked the question earlier, Pim, about where I was talking about that. For the starting whisky, for me, a Balvenie Double Wood sits on the bullseye of that square. Right in the bullseye, a fantastic, well-balanced starting single malt Scotch whisky. It's in the middle. Now, you get used to drinking the Balvenie if you enjoy that. Then you can go smoky, you can go light, you can go delicate, you can go rich from there and take your time and understand it. But once you know this and you taste a Balvenie, It is just heaven in a glass, in my opinion.
Good to know, because Reinhard asked this question, so he now has his answer to the best starter whiskey, actually, then.
Yes, I would say Balvenie Doublewood is one of the best. And another brand which is quite good for that is the Macallan. The Macallan double matured, double oak matured, I think they call it. It's a 12-year-old. Again, that's very similar to this. I don't think it's quite as nice, but that's my personal opinion. As we say here in Scotland, there's no such thing as a bad whiskey. Only some are better than others. So always remember. So Balvenie, we've had a little nose, no smoke. So we plot it right in the bullseye of the 4 squares. It's absolutely perfect. Take it back to your nose, and you have another aromas of it, and you get the sweetness. But the sweetness is not dry. It's caramel, it's honey, it's toffee. I mean, the first few seconds you get the alcohol, but after that, it's just wonderful aromas coming from your whiskey. All these different aromas. It's like nuts, almost like hazelnuts, cloves, the spices coming from it. It is just absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely one of the best whiskies you'll ever get. And if you've got a Balvenie in front of you, agree with me, hopefully. If you get any noses from that, or if you've got a different whiskey with you, tell me what you've got, and I'll try and identify it and be able to tell you some of the aromas you may be able to get from it, because it helps you open your mind to see what's actually going on. So we've had a lovely nose. We've got 5, 6, 7 different aromas there again, and we're now going to have a wee taste of it.
In the meantime, while you're tasting, Neil, Reinhard asks the question: which age should you get the Balvenie, the whiskey?
The Balvenie Doublewood's a 12-year-old. Age doesn't really matter in a whiskey. I know people who will say they'll not drink anything younger than an 18-year-old whiskey, a 20-year-old whiskey. It is purely, if you understand the word, snobbery. Edinburgh is one of my favourite whiskies. It's a 10-year-old. The Balvenie used to do what was called a Founder's Reserve, which was a 10-year-old, and that was my favourite whiskey of all time. And it was just phenomenal. And I actually met David Stewart, who used to be the head brewer, distiller for Balvenie, who argued with me the 12-year-old signature reserve, they called it at the time, before the Doublewood came in, was better. But he conceded privately that the 10-year-old was actually a more rounded whiskey. So age is not really relevant in a single malt. And Sheriff drinking a Singleton single malt right now. Yeah, there's what one is it? It depends where you are, because there's 3 different. There's Singleton of Dufftown, Singleton of Glenord, and Singleton of Glendullan, and they're all owned by Diageo, but they're all made in. But there's 2 different distilleries who make them, the 3 different brands, and each Singleton is for a different market somewhere in the world. So that'll come a bit clearer as well on blended whiskey. So we've had a taste of it, and it's just the caramel, the toffee, almost chocolate coming through, the spices. I don't get nut on the palate, but the finish is medium finish. It sits at the back of your tongue, and just absolutely wonderful. Singleton of Dufftown. Yep, yeah, it's a nice one. Green bottle. There's about 5 different expressions of that. Yeah, it's a nice one. Where are you based about? Is that's Dufftown's normally for the Asian market, I think. I'm pretty sure Glenord's American. Dufftown, I think, is Glendullan's American market. I think Dufftown's the Asian market. I'm pretty sure. So we're going to have a taste of water with the Balvenie, and again, it's heaven in a glass, just on its own. But if you have a Balvenie or something similar, darker colour, drop your 3-4 drops of water in. Look closely, you'll see the oil separating. It's incredible when you actually see that going, and that's just your flavours opening, just opening all the opportunities to enjoy it. Take it back, and the sweetness is just, it's the first thing you get. It's the only thing you get. It's like caramel cake. It's like, we call it here millionaire shortbread, which is chocolate biscuit and butterscotch sort of caramel. There's a bit of butterscotch coming through there, and cloves is just a wonderful balance of the whole aroma coming from it, and on the taste as well. Slange. It's just so smooth, sits at the middle of the tongue. As it sits in your mouth, on your tongue, it gets smoother and smoother, sweeter and sweeter. Yeah, there is alcohol there. I'm not just saying it's completely like a sweet. You know, there's alcohol and there's a burning to it, but the sweetness takes over, and it's just so much like honey caramel. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful flavour, and it's one of the best ones. Now, when I was talking earlier on about the regions of Scotch whisky, people will say to me, I like a lowland, I like an Islay. I can understand people saying, I like an Islay. Predominantly, Islay is a peaty, smoky whisky. However, Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain do completely unpeated whisky. So if you're actually saying, I'm a whisky drinker from, or an Islay whisky drinker, and I like a Lagavulin, I like a Lafroig, and I go into a bar in America or Hong Kong or wherever you may be in the world, or Eindhoven, and you don't have a Lagavulin, and you say, I'm going to go for an Islay whisky because I like Islay. If you got a Bruichladdich Classic Laddie, it's sweeter in the Glenkinchie, it's sweeter than the Balvenie. It is nothing like a Lagavulin. Again, flavour map will tell you that. They're in complete opposite corners, but from the same region. Now, the interesting one is Balvenie in a whisky called Glenfiddich, 12-year-old. Most of you over a certain age, if you've been drinking whisky probably since the 90s, previous to that, there was only two whiskies, single malt whiskies, anywhere in the world, Glenmorangie and Glenfiddich. So a lot of people over 40, 45 may know the Glenfiddich. It's completely different drink to the Balvenie double wood. I mean, night and day, completely different. They're both made in the same town called Dufftown. Funny enough, the Singleton of Dufftown. It's two different distilleries. They're actually owned by the same company, William Grant and Son. They're less than 100 yards apart. They use the same water, the same barley, the same yeast. They quite often share the same staff. The staff will jump from distillery to distillery, and yet their whiskies are a million miles apart. And that's two Speyside whiskies owned by the same company, made by everything identical. So the regions for me don't cut it. Try and understand the flavour map, and you will, trust me, enjoy your single malt whisky much more. Before we go into the third one, the final one, I'm going to tell you the difference between blended whisky and single malt whisky. Remember the definition of single malt whisky? Well, there's actually a third whisky here made in Scotland called single grain whisky. It's closer to the Irish edition. And yes, people always ask me, and it's unusual, it's when Americans are on, they'll always ask me, Neil, is Irish whisky or Scotch whisky the best? Well, two answers to that, two reasons for my answer to that. The first one is I'm obviously going to be biased because I'm Scottish, so I'm going to answer it that one. But there's a brand that most of you will know in Ireland called Jameson's, which is the second oldest whisky in Ireland and by far the biggest seller worldwide of Irish whisky. John Jameson, who invented it, was a Scotsman, born and brought up in Alloa next to Stirling. Now, that must tell you what whisky is the best. However, it's personal opinion. And if there's any people from Ireland on that, I don't mean any offence. I am biased on that. But blended whisky, as I say, is completely different. People refer to blended whisky as the poor relation to single malt whisky. It is not. Blended whisky is made to suit the human palate. Up until the 1600s, whisky's been made here in Scotland as we know it. Well, not as we know it, as a different icon. From the 1400s, it was probably awful because it was never matured. It would probably be in clay. It would be kept in any receptacle they could. And if it was from America, it's like moonshine. From Ireland, it's like poaching. And from Central Europe, it's some of the homemade grappas, which are absolutely awful to drink. And people in these days in Scotland just drunk it to hide the pain, get rid of the pain of the hard lives they had. But in the early 1600s, there was a chap called Andrew Usher. Andrew Usher was a beer maker in Edinburgh who decided to make blended whisky to try and make it palatable and suitable for everyone to drink. So what he did is he got single grain whisky. Now, single grain whisky is a cheaper whisky. It's made of up to maximum 15% barley, some corn and some wheat. I hear you thinking now, how can it be single grains when there's 3 grains in it? Remember, the word single means one whisky. made in one distillery. It's a single grain whisky with the 3 grains. It's a continuous process. I'll give the Irish their due. It's the pot stills there are called coffee stills. They're like big test tubes, and it just continually flows through 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's a cheaper whisky to make because it's constant, and the grain is a lot cheaper. So that's your definitions from there. So how do we make blended whisky? Well, quite simply, we get 50% of a bottle is made up of single grain whisky. It's cheaper to make. It's a filler. The other 50% of the bottle is made up of over 50 different single malt whiskies. Over 50. Now the blender, that's what we call them, the master blender, he or she will make that blended whisky by putting 50% single grain and up to or over 50 different single malt whiskies. And how do they achieve this perfect blend every time? Purely by looking at it and by nosing it. It never ever crosses their lips because the palate is disguised. That's the pleasure. Week after week, year after year, decade after decade, these master blenders will get the perfect blended whisky to suit your palate constantly by looking and by nosing. It's quite incredible. It's not a skill. It's not a profession, in my opinion. It's an absolute art. But we're going to make some with locals blended whisky just for a demonstration purposes. We have 3 whiskies here. So instead of 50 single malts, bear with me and try and think hypothetically. With locals are a great company, remember. So they're not going to make cheap whisky with 50% of the single grain. It's only going to be 40%. So we're going to get more expensive single malt whisky. So it's 40% single grain, 20% Glenkinchie, 20% Balvenie, 20% Lagavulin. Put all together, and the master blender, he or she, will look at it and knows it, and will get that blended whisky absolutely perfect every time for years. Now, Balvenie may have difficulties one year. They may not be as good. The quality might be down for whatever reason. What do we do then? Not a problem. We reduce that to 18% potentially. 21, 21, or 18, 20, 22. Various different obligations there, and get exactly the same blend by looking and by nosing. Balvenie may disappear one year. Now just think of this in the real world. 50 or thereabouts different single malt whiskies. One single malt disappears because they're in liquidation. It may be replaced by 1. It may be replaced by 2. It may be replaced by 22. We don't know. We'll never know because it's an art of the blender, master blender, looking, nosing, and getting your blended whisky 100%. As I say, it's not a pure relation. It's made specifically for the human palate. Up until the mid-1980s, late 1980s, Glenfiddich and Glenmorangie were the only 2 single malts you would get worldwide. There's hundreds, there's thousands now, because we've mastered the art of the maturation. Blended is made to suit you, and so much so that if you're in the United States, the biggest selling blended whisky is Dewar's white label. You go into Asia, Japan, parts of China, Chivas Regal is the biggest selling blended whisky. You come here into Scotland, and I think actually Netherlands are similar. Pim, correct me if I'm wrong here. Famous Grouse is one of the big ones in Netherlands. It is here in Scotland. Made to suit our palate. Chivas Regal's made to suit the Asian palate. Even in Europe here, you go down to Spain, you go down to Italy, it's Cutty Sark, it's Ballantine's, it's Pim has behind him there. Is the big sellers here. Here in Scotland, we wouldn't thank you for either of them, but they're specifically made to suit your palate. Single malt whisky has far more colour, it has more flavour and more character, but you have to acquire the taste for a single malt whisky. And finally, we're going to have a quick taste of a Lagavulin. Lagavulin's from Islay, and it's nothing to do with being Islay. It's just the way we go is short finish, medium finish. This is a bit of a long finish, so hopefully one or two of you have a Lagavulin. I can see Pim getting his bottle open there.
I'm joining you.
You may not be able to drink it. You shouldn't drink it out of the bottle, but you'll be able to nose it even from the bottle, Pim, and hopefully you know what I'm talking about. So, is that Sheriff? Egyptians love the black label Johnnie Walker and Chivas 18. Yeah. Interesting fact about Johnnie Walker Black Label: it is the biggest selling whiskey in the world. It is not only the biggest selling whiskey in the world; it is actually the biggest selling alcoholic drink in the world. Taking beer out of the equation. The French in France, they sell cognac and brandy. Johnnie Walker Black Label as a brand sells 7 times more of the whole of France sells in cognac and brandy in a year. Strangely enough, and real surprisingly enough, the biggest market for Johnnie Walker Black Label is India. Miles ahead of everywhere else. Then it is Brazil, strangely enough. But yeah, it's Johnnie Walker is a phenomenal seller and bringing revenue into Scotland here. So we've got the Lagavulin. We'll have a look at the Lagavulin. Pim, have you got a glass? Yep, you can see.
Yep.
If you look at the colour here, you wouldn't have seen the Glenkinchie, but it's more a sort of reddish, darker gold sort of colour, honeyish colour. Yeah, the Glenkinchie is considerably lighter of this. The first indication that tells us it's a double maturation. Probably has been in bourbon, which it has been, and sherry is always the invariable you go to. So have a look at that in the colour. So that's going to tell me it's not on the left-hand side. It's not on the light side. It's going towards the right, the rich side. And we can verify that by sugaring your glass. Have a look at the legs. And the legs here are particularly slow dropping. There's big oil line there, just with ruggedness, as we call it here in Scotland, just dropping away. So this tells me it's pretty rich. So we're going over towards the rich side. Again, until you actually appreciate the map, you won't be able to plot it exactly, because there is whiskies purely have sherry maturation and they look like black tea, to be honest with you. So you can tell the difference. But we don't know if this is going to be on the halfway line with Balvenie, because the legs are slightly almost the same, slightly to the right, because the legs are slower and richer. Take one nose off it, and when I talk about the smoke, the peat, you get that right away. And this is what's called phenol. Phenol is a natural aroma which comes from burning peat, and peat is a fossil fuel. It's younger than coal. It's in the ground and we dig it up. And this was done by default because the west coast of Scotland, the islands, Isle of Skye, up to Orkney, this is a natural fuel even to this day. Open fires. If you walk through the Isle of Skye, the Isle of Islay, where this is made, in September on a cooler evening, the open fires are burning. That's what you'll smell. Wonderful aroma. Not as intense as this one. So this tells us right away it's rich, it's smoky. So this is going up into the top right-hand corner. There you go. It's as simple as that. Night and day from Glenkinchie in the bottom left-hand corner. Once you've established that, you can take it back to your nose. And once you get through that phenol, that smell, you can get a little bit honey coming through. You can get the woodiness, the spiciness coming through, and it's almost like nutmeg coming through there. You get the sherry. If you haven't nosed sherry before or smelt it, the European sherry, it's that sweetness. You get that oakiness, the woodness coming, because the European oak is soft and imparts that lovely woody, almost like a Chardonnay if you're a wine drinker, a Chardonnay oaky nose coming through it. Absolutely wonderful. Have a little taste of it. And yes, the phenol hits you. As it goes to the back of the tongue, you get the spices coming through now. You get the nutmeg. It's like cloves coming through, sucking a clove. After that 5-6 seconds, you've got the sweetness coming through. You've got the honey, a real sweet honey. You've got some caramel coming through. A little bit nuttiness coming through, and the smoothness of the sherry. Absolutely fantastic. But you still have this phenol coming. This strange flavour at the back of your tongue. But add a little touch of water if you can. And with this one, if you have a glass, you can see the oil separating quite incredibly, the darker it is. And just allow it to do it. Go back to your nose, and the phenol has softened completely. If you've ever been out camping and you have a campfire and you put some water over the campfire and you get that aroma from the burnt wood coming back, that's what you get now. You can almost class it like cigar smoke if you're a cigar smoker. Just imagine sitting with a nice cigar, enjoying that as well. But you get the sherry coming through, you get the caramel coming through, you're getting the honey coming through behind that fino, nice and easy. And have a taste with it with water. Smooth, a lot smoother. I would say add a little bit more water than you would normally for a standard whiskey. The peater it is. The first thing it still hits you is the phenol. As that dissipates in your mouth, the sweetness of the honey, the caramel, the sherry, the wood and oak like a Chardonnay just comes through, and it sits at the back of your tongue, and you just feel it into your throat. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful single malt Scotch whisky. As I say, there's no such thing as a bad whisky. Some are better than others. Folks,
I agree, Neil.
Yeah.
Quickly interrupting because you did
No
this
problem.
entire story about this specific whiskey, and I was just following your story and doing the same thing as you. And I can only agree that everything you said was like true. I didn't like notice before when I drank it, but now it's it fits perfectly. So thanks for that for the
Not a problem.
experience for me.
And once you knows it, and you have that, opens your mind, Pim. It actually, you enjoy it better. You really do enjoy
Definitely.
it better. Yeah. It is very subjective. I get a lot of American women, and whiskey is so diverse, and my whole display and presentation is to try and show how diverse the single malt Scotch whisky is. I get a lot of American clients, and particularly the women will say, "Oh, Neil, I hate Scotch whisky. It's absolutely awful." And you can tell the husband drinks an Islay whisky, a Lagavulin, a Lafroig, and an Ardbeg, and they actually think that's what Scotch whisky is. It is not. It's so diverse. I would actually say there is a single malt Scotch whisky out there for every person who wants to try it, and you'll find one you'll enjoy.
That's like the best finishing words I can come up with for a single malt Scotch whisky tasting, Neil.
Thanks, Pim.
Wow, that was a really nice experience. I mean, I'm looking at the chat and I see a lot of people also joined in, like Sharif with the Singleton single malt whiskey that you already mentioned. I see Eric and Reinout. Well, at least Eric says, "I'm convinced about the Balvenie, if I pronounce that correctly.
Balvenie,
that he's going to order that." Reinout, I think he's also going for the same. At least he looked up the price already. So
I don't know what it is in Europe, but it's reasonably priced, and it's a fantastic, as I would say, middle of the road whiskey to start and branch out into the four corners of the whiskey flavour map. You can't go wrong. Even now, I'm a very, very experienced whiskey drinker, and it doesn't matter where I am in the world. And I travel the world following Scotland at football. Yes, people may laugh at me. I've been in every corner of the world, and you can get a Balvenie in most of these corners, and it's still my go-to single malt whiskey. I highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I know that, like Eric mentioned, he's going to buy it. Reinhard was looking up the price, and I'm not sure that I don't have it in my collection here, but I'm pretty sure that I will also have it real soon. Let's see. I have Eric mentioning, "Thanks a lot for this great story, Neil. It was a blast." I can agree with that. We have Erverlange mentioning, "Have a nice evening further, Neil, and thanks for your very interesting masterclass about the Scotch whisky tasting."
Pleasure.
And I also Reinout mentions, "Thanks, Neil. That was amazing. Wish we could hang out sometime." Yeah, I mean,
come to Scotland. Pim will give you my details, or come over with locals, and we'll go for a dram.
Yeah, we'll go for a dram and eat an Schugel first, and then drink it.
Well, you've got that spot on, Pim. The Schugel, I like that.
Yeah. I learned a lot from this. I mean, like, I think everyone who watched this really learned a lot from, like, how to drink whiskey, what you can expect from drinking whiskey. So it was really, for me as a moderator, it was an experience, but I can only imagine what the people at home might have experienced. I see that the link for you as a host on With Locals is now also being shared in the chat. So for all the viewers that want to know more about Neil, please click on this link, and you can contact him on there and maybe ask him more questions or anything other related with Neil on With Locals. Neil, Thank you thank you very much for today with the single malt Scotch whiskey tasting that you just experienced for us. I'm literally like stumbling upon my words now because I was so amazed. Yeah, thank you. I know what I'm going to do when I'm back home. I'm at least going to try one of these, and then with water, without water, and then I think we all had a blast with this. So once again, thank you very much, Neil. Hope you also enjoyed it doing this with us. And
Yeah.
I think for all the viewers, it was really nice that there was some the interactivity. Oh, I forget one thing, by the way. Someone T Video USA who also mentions, "Great show, Neil. Who'd have ever thought you were so interesting?"
I suspect I know who that may be.
So that's the last comment that I got from the chat here. Let's. I think we can wrap this up. Once again, last time I'm going to say this. Thank you very much, Neil. Let's go over the schedule quickly for tomorrow, because tomorrow we have one more live stream coming up, which is the Spanish veggie tapas experience with Drika, which will be at 7 p.m. CET. So if you really like this, you can leave your email in the subscribe box on withlocals.tv, or you can hit the like, follow, or subscribe buttons on YouTube, Twitch, or Facebook. And you can also see the full schedule on withlocals.tv. But for now, everybody who has a whiskey, please enjoy it tonight, and hopefully see you soon back again on the With Locals TV. So have a good evening and see you soon. Bye-bye.